does poetry offer in any language, really? And I think this time of year is the perfect time to ask that question, because poetry really takes place in the body. Even when you read it, it turns out neuroscientists have found that things are activating in your brain in a different way from reading other kinds of texts, because there's a pattern to the language. It's language that draws attention to itself as language. And so the effect is kind of like flowers bursting out. Emily Dickinson said she knows it's poetry because it takes off the top of her head. And I think every culture values its poets. Every culture refers to poets as a particular element of that culture, sometimes refers to them scornfully as being unserious. But I think that poetry is doing something important, and we often perceive it through popular music or classical music, where it's set to music to be sung. But when it's read aloud, whether you're reading it off the page or whether you're listening to a poet reading it, it really is reaching you through language, which is one of the most primal human experiences. What makes Ukrainian poetry especially interesting? I would say it's the sense of doing something important for the culture. I don't see this as much in the United States unless it's a poet who comes from a disadvantaged group or a minority group. I've never felt that if I don't write my poetry, the culture is suffering. And a lot of Ukrainian poets, as in many small countries, really feel that if they have the talent, they owe it to the culture and the language to be writing. The most famous Ukrainian poet of the 19th century was Taras Shevchenko, who was born into serfdom in the early 19th century, but there were people who admired his talent as an artist, and they bought his freedom. After a few years of studying art and writing poetry in St. Petersburg, he was arrested and he was exiled for writing and persisting in writing free-thinking poetry and for persisting in writing in Ukrainian. In the 1920s, the early Soviet years, there was a real renaissance of Ukrainian literature, poetry and prose. But the early 1930s, you get what Ukrainians refer to as an executed renaissance. Poets were arrested, some were driven to suicide, some were shot in prison, others were eventually executed in the far north of the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, so thousands of kilometers from where they came from. And there were further moves to push the Russian language in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, teaching in Russian, publishing in Russian, and shifting populations, moving people from one part of the very large Soviet Union to another. In the United States, really there was very little teaching about Ukraine, very little awareness about Ukraine in the educational system, with just a couple of exceptions. Since 1991, a large number of Ukrainian scholars have moved to the United States. A large number of Ukrainians have entered graduate school and then become specialists who are teaching here. Before 91, it was felt that it was unneeded, but since 2014, there's been more and more interest. And so the United States is now more comparable to Canada, which also always had more education about Ukraine. So I'm going to talk a bit about one Ukrainian poet named Serhiy Zhadan. Zhadan was born in 1974 in that eastern part of Ukraine, in Luhansk. He has 12 books of poetry published, some very successful prose, a couple of novels that have been translated into English. And he also fronts a ska punk band that was originally named Sobaki v Kosmose, or Dogs in Space. And since Zhadan became so famous, they changed their name to Zhadan i Sobaki, Zhadan and the Dogs. So he's been living in Kharkiv, in the northeastern part of Ukraine. It's a city with a strong tradition of poetry and literature, and he's remained in Kharkiv since the beginning of the war in February. So here are some translations taken from the website LitHub, and they were made by Amelia Glazer, who's a professor at the University of California at San Diego, and Yulia Ilchuk, who's a professor at Stanford University. So poems by Serhiy Zhadan. Don't say it aloud. Don't let the coastal span of another utterance roll off your tongue. It's a subtle, innate human skill of non-articulation, omission, awkwardness, concealing something light behind your heart, something so light, so sweet, so unshareable, this wild generosity of not burdening anyone with things that might make their face twitch. And then speech starts like the start of a cold. It warms your lungs and the fever sets in. And since early August, anxious people have been wandering about, glowing from within with this mysterious light. So this last one, this poem, is from the book Words of War, and it was translated by Virliana Tkach and Wanda Phipps, who had been translating Jardin for quite a while. He was often invited to New York City to perform. Take only what is most important. Take only what is most important. Take the letters. Take only what you can carry. Take the icons and the embroidery. Take the silver. Take the wooden crucifix and the golden replicas. Take some bread, the vegetables from the garden, then leave. We will never return again. We will never see our city again. Take the letters, all of them, every last piece of bad news. We will never see our corner store again. We will never drink from that dry well again. We will never see familiar faces again. We are refugees. We'll run all night. We will run past fields of sunflowers. We will run from dogs, rest with cows. We'll scoop up water with our bare hands. Sit waiting in camps, annoying the dragons of war. You will not return, and friends will never come back. There will be no smoky kitchens, no usual jobs. There will be no dreamy nights in sleepy towns, no green valleys, no suburban wastelands. The sun will be a smudge on the window of a cheap train, rushing past cholera pits covered with lime. There will be blood on women's heels, tired guards on borderlands covered with snow. A postman with empty bags shot down, a priest with a hapless smile hung by his ribs, the quiet of a cemetery, the noise of a command post, and unedited lists of the dead, so long that there won't be enough time to check them for your own name.